Hello and welcome to Movoto Mike, a new real estate podcast brought to you by Movoto.com. My name is Patrick Kearns. I'm an ex-journalist and 10-year vet of the real estate industry who's currently working as Movoto's head of communications. Here with me, as always, is my associate, Sophie Brandeis. Sophie, how you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Patrick. It's the start of summer, and we get to podcast with a podcaster, so that's always fun.
I love it. Who have you brought as our guest today, Sophie?
So coming on the mic with over a decade of experience in real estate, coaching, training, and high-level systemization and integration, we have Nikki Miller. Nikki founded and served as CEO of the Lead Syndicate, a first-of-its-kind leverage platform for individual agents. Earlier this year, the Lead Syndicate was acquired by Movoto to launch Lever by Movoto. Currently, she serves as the Vice President of Lever and Agent Platforms at Movoto. Aside from being an entrepreneur, a leader, and an expert in all things real estate, Nikki is also the co-host of the One Thing podcast, which has achieved over 11 million lifetime downloads. With that, welcome to the show, Nikki.
Hey, y'all. I'm so excited to be here.
We are excited to have you. You and I share something which I think is pretty unique in the real estate industry, in that we both got our start in sports, which is not the most natural transition, but now, years later, we are working in the real estate industry.
We can both coin ourselves ex-journalists.
Yeah, exactly. And talk to me a little bit about why real estate, why you didn't want to continue to be a journalist, sort of how you made that transition and how you decided that real estate was the thing that you actually wanted to, spend more time doing and focus your energy in.
Yeah, I'll give you all the real honest story, like the real behind the scenes. I usually pad this up a little bit if somebody asks me who knows what I used to do, but I'll give you the real story, which is that I got very lucky that I started as a written journalist. I wanted to actually go work for a newspaper and sort of fell into sports reporting. And frankly, the way that I fell into sports reporting was that there was nobody else who knew anything about sports. And they were like, Nikki, do you know anything about football? Can you write about this football game? And I was like, yeah, I got it. And that then turned into, and this was like way back in high school. And then that then turned into, I got into sports broadcasting over radio and over TV, small, more localized stuff. And then when I went to college, I thought to myself, well, I'd love to do both. I really love to write, but I also started to really enjoy and kind of fall in love with doing more broadcast journalism. And by, a stroke of straight luck, I got an internship with the NFL as a sideline reporter. And the intent of this internship, Patrick knows this, but the whole intent of doing one of these internships is just to sort of get repetition, right? Like your goal is to just get some free camera time. You're sort of doing the grunt work. It's like the worst job in the world. And you're just doing a bunch of the grunt work. And all your goal to do there is to do some random interviews that you could smash together at the end of a few years for some type of highlight reel, right? And so what ended up happening is I was spending time with the team, was spending time with the reporter that I was shadowing, and I ended up getting an actual opportunity to be their sideline reporter. And what I realized after a couple seasons of doing this was I really loved what I was doing, but I wasn't in love with what I was doing enough to work as long as I would need to work, to hustle as long as I would need to hustle, to actually make a career of this. And you just don't, one does not get into journalism to make a lot of money.
Nope.
It does not lead you to financial freedom. Let me say it that way. And I was very clear that I wanted to live a really big life. I knew that I wanted to invest, that I wanted financial freedom, and that I wanted to have a lot of options in my life. And that meant that I needed to do well financially. So the actual story is that I went to the library one day. I'm a junior in college at this point in my third season with the NFL. And I went to the library one day and I went to the section of biographies and I just started pulling books off the shelves and saying, okay, what do all these people have in common who had made a lot of money and done really well for themselves? And guess what they all had in common? Real estate. and building businesses. So I was like, I can do that. So I double majored in finance and went straight from college. I quit that season, and everybody told me I was crazy. They're like, this is the job of a lifetime. Like, how could you ever quit something like this? And I just realized that I was taking somebody's spot. I was taking somebody's spot who really was in love with that industry and would do it for the love of it. And I didn't love it that much. And so I got the experience, which, by the way, I think predicated a lot of my future success. I think that the experience that I got there, learning how to speak to people, how to write, and how to ask great questions, I really do believe that set me up for what my career was going to be in the future in a way that I could have never predicted or known at the time. And that's the real story of how I got into real estate, and I went straight from college to getting into the real estate world.
I think what's crazy is it's so diametrically opposite, right? With real estate industry, it's so much of building your own career and sort of taking your own opportunities. But like with sports journalism, I know this was the case for me. Like when I was covering the Rangers and not making any money and like mostly just freelancing and hustling, like all of the beat reporters that covered the team are still the same beat reporters covering the team. Yeah. So like you're waiting for an opportunity to open, basically. It's like if the beat is all a bunch of people in their mid-30s, like I'm going to be waiting 20 to 30 years before there's even an opportunity to be a full-time beat reporter, right? So it is sort of like crazy how different that is.
100%. But what I also tell people is, I don't know if you experienced this, Patrick, but for me, I was a sideline reporter, right? And I always try to remind everybody that job, they go immediately to someone like Erin Andrews, who's really like the sort of poster child of what a career in that could be. Like she took it on to doing brand things and partnerships and things like that, and has done an incredible job. But when I was doing it, it's the worst job ever. Like imagine that you're reporting for a team. So you're reporting for them whether they win or whether they lose, right? And it just so happened the team I was reporting for was losing a lot. And so like imagine as a professional athlete, you're literally paid to win. And my job was to get them to stop and talk to me when they were like completely in the zone in their game, or after when they had lost and were pissed and all they wanted to do was go to the locker room and be left alone. And then I had to be the one to tackle, so to speak, these like big, huge, enormous dudes and be like, hey, can you stop and talk to me? Even though I know the literal last thing you want to do is to communicate with me right now and be asked these questions. And then you have to get them to be happy enough to not completely ruin their career on camera, right? So what it ended up predicating was not only my ability to, like I said, speak and ask questions, but also my ability to talk to people and make them comfortable really fast, right? And to build relationships with people who may in the moment like otherwise not be super interested in building a relationship, right? And it sort of went directly into when I started working with home buyers and home sellers, the way I grew my whole business was door knocking. Right. And I literally door to door would communicate with homeowners and talk to them about any plans they had to sell their home in the future. And you have to imagine that when you're knocking on someone's door, you're like interrupting their day. They don't know who you are. They don't want to talk to you. They're in the middle of whatever they're in the middle of. And I really pulled on all that experience I had of like, frankly, just being really good at getting people to communicate with me who had no plans to and did not want to.
Right. And I was gonna point out that fact. I mean, talking to these NFL players after their games must have given you so many takeaways to apply to the real estate industry. So you're 22, you're right out of college, you're entering the world of real estate. Where are you? Where do you end up? And where do you go?
So where I started, right out of school, I was born and raised in Southern California, grew up in Southern California, and went to school in Southern California. And right out of college, I went and I thought that I wanted to work more on the finance side in real estate. But I always had sort of a knack for numbers, and I sort of came to the logical conclusion that if I could work numbers in real estate, it would help me in the future with my investing, right? And so I went to work for a real estate investment and development firm as an underwriter. And for those that are listening who don't know what that means, an underwriter is like basically the person who runs all the numbers in a spreadsheet to make sure a deal makes sense. And so I was lucky enough, again, sort of being in the right place at the right time, I was lucky enough to get my start with a with a very early stage company. So it was basically a startup. I was employee number 3, and I went to an early stage investment firm as their first and only underwriter. So the cool thing is that normally in that environment, you'd have to work your way up to certain levels of deals. And I got thrown into everything. I was doing all the deals. I was in all the meetings. I was doing all the deals. I was underwriting everything. There was no level or complexity that I was not exposed to. And in that business, the way that you really make money, like the way that you participate in upside, is either getting to some type of partner level or investing yourself. And so that was my number one goal there. I wanted to become a partner at that firm. That was literally my life's mission. At 22-year-old Nikki, that's all that I wanted to do, right? And so I went into that firm, and I kid you guys not, I was working literally 7 days a week. Had there been 8 days, I would have worked that one too. I was working 80 to 100 hours a week. I literally lived at the office, and I was living and breathing this business so that I could get the opportunity to become a partner. And I'll never forget the day that I got offered partnership. I was only about a year in, and it was huge, right? I'm still about 22, maybe 23 at the time. I just got offered partnership. This is this big goal that I have. And I go home that day, and I was living with my boyfriend at the time, now husband. And I go home that day, and I look at him and I say, I have the best day. Like, I've got the best news. And he goes, me too. And I was like, you go first. And he said, I got a promotion and they're moving me to Northern California. And I was like, I should have gone first, because I just found out that I'm getting a partnership opportunity. And at the time, the world of virtual that we live in now was not available. And so I went back to that company, and I made the decision that I really liked my now husband. So it ended up working out well. But I liked him. So I said, I'll go with you. And I gave up that opportunity and moved to Northern California with no job, no prospects, and no idea what I wanted to do. And completely devastated, because like the thing that I had worked so hard for, I got, and then basically gave up before I got it. So we moved to Northern California, and I thought, what am I going to do? I had worked so hard, and I thought to myself, like, I don't know if I have it in me again. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to replicate that same timing, same experience. And frankly, again, I don't know if I love it enough to do that for another 4 or 5 years, if that's what it's going to take, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, well, if my big goal is to invest in real estate and to build a business, what's something where I could kind of do both of those things? And that's when I got my real estate license and started my actual real estate sales career.
I know a lot of your growth and came at your time at Keller Williams, and I think something that's interesting about Keller Williams is this sort of emphasis on education and coaching and growth. So many of our leaders came from Keller Williams, you, Chris, JT, but then also so much of this like next generation of real estate leaders have come from Keller Williams. The Tim Heil, Ben Kinney, right, Glenn Sanford, all of these people that are like the big movers and shakers in the real estate industry have done times to sort of come up in the Keller Williams system. So what do you think it is about Keller Williams that sort of created this next generation of real estate leaders and sort of the way they cultivate talent?
I mean, I think there's a lot of elements. I think that talent often quests to be surrounded by other talent. And I think Keller Williams has done an incredible job of curating an environment that allows people to succeed and to define their own success. And there's nothing that talent likes more than that, right? I always say if you hire really talented people in your organization, your number one job is to teach them how to succeed in that organization. Because really talented people don't like showing up to work every day feeling like they're losing, or worse, not knowing whether they're winning or losing, right? So I think Keller Williams does that really, really well, where they get to be surrounded by other talented people and also have an opportunity to really define their success. Secondarily, I think that they've done a great job of building this environment. You said it right, Patrick, that's very much predicated on growth and provides a lot of growth opportunities. And when you get a lot of growth-minded people together and then pour into them even more and help them to grow even more, I mean, it's just a matter of time until a lot of really amazing things happen, right? And I think that's why you see so many incredible leaders coming out of that environment, because that's already who they are. And most companies don't build that environment, or somebody coming in has to create it, right? And that's such a foundational part of what Keller Williams is, that a lot of people, I think, find their home there because of that. That it's more a feeling of, I've never seen this in a company before, so these must be my people.
So I know you spent about 10 years at Keller Williams. Maybe briefly walk us through your growth there, and then what pain point you saw towards the end of your time at Keller Williams that led you to start Lever.
Yeah, so I think that my entire career at Keller Williams really was getting me ready to build Lever, and for Lever to become, what it is and what it's becoming. And so I'll tell you that without knowing it, the idea for Lever has been with me for a really long time, because I started at Keller Williams, and I'm still an agent there, right? But I started at Keller Williams as a brand new individual agent. And I really started there in the way everybody starts, which is I was brand new. I didn't know anything, and I was learning how to become a real estate agent. And I was one of the crazy people that actually just did what they told me to do, and I became very successful pretty quickly. And then I went into my manager's office one day and said, "Hey, I've hit my ceiling of achievement in my business, and I'm not really sure what to do now. Y'all haven't led me astray yet. Tell me what I do now." And what that meant for me in the moment was that I just hit my ceiling in the number of transactions that I was able to do by myself, right? And so I went to her and said, "Babe, I've hit that ceiling. What do I do?" And she was like, "Okay, well, now we're going to get you a coach, and then we're going to teach you how to hire people, and then we're going to teach you how to fire people, and then we're going to teach you how to manage overhead, and we're going to teach you how to build systems, and we're going to teach you how to do marketing." And I was like, "Oh, no. I don't want to do any of that." And at the time, I'm 23, right? I'm like, I am barely responsible for myself. I should not be responsible for anybody else. I should not be hiring people. I do not want to manage overhead. The whole idea of it, I really had not stepped into my entrepreneurial power yet, and was like, listen, I'm good at one thing and one thing only, and that is selling some real estate. I am a great real estate agent, and I am absolutely not prepared to be a business owner. And so I struggled for a while. And I remember going back into my manager's office about 6 months later, after kind of starting this path that she had told me to start. And I remember going into her and saying verbatim, I just remember this so vividly. And in this moment, I always say that's when Lever was born, before I even knew it. I went in her office and I said, "Hey, thanks so much for all these classes and for the coach. But I don't want to do any of this. Somebody before me has figured this out. Can I just pay them to do it? Does that exist?" And she said, "No, you're not allowed to do that." And she said, if you don't want to build it yourself, if you don't want to go through the pain of building it yourself and taking on the overhead, then you could join a team. And historically, it's still the truth today, in order to join a team, you'd have to give up your brand, put your production under them. And it wasn't a financial model I was a big fan of. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And this is also a long time ago now, right? So teams were in their early iterations. They were not teams as we know them today. There are a lot of really amazing, high functioning teams today, but then it was like a group of people connected by one person's credit card. It was not a real business, right? And so I looked at that and was like, nope, don't want to go that route. And I said, okay, well, if I don't want to build it myself and I don't want to join a team, what are my options? And she said, well, if you don't want to do that, then I guess you just stay where you are. And what she didn't have to say is that I would suffer the consequences of staying where I was, right? Which to me, as somebody who was a high achiever and really driven, was a slow death, right? And so I looked up and said, okay, well, there's just got to be a better way. I just kept going back to, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. So sort of by force, I ended up building it out myself. And then I became the CEO of what at the time was the largest Keller Williams in California. And we had 500 agents. We were doing a couple billion in sales volume a year. It was a huge, huge, huge company, multiple companies in one company. And it was there that I realized that this little problem that I had faced as an individual agent wasn't unique, right? Every agent ever was going through the same challenges, the same ceilings, and they would come into me and we would have the same stupid conversation that I had literally 10 years ago. And I was like, there has got to be a better way. And I remember one day, I literally still have the journal page. You guys can't see it now, but it's literally written up it's framed in my wall, because it was a really pivotal moment in my career where I said, man, this is such a big opportunity for the person who has the courage to come and build this. There has to be a leader out there who is qualified to put all these pieces together and to deliver to the industry what it's been asking for. And I literally described exactly what Lever is today in great detail and said, someone should go and create this. And then I sort of had a moment. I was like sitting in my chair at home and it was COVID. And I thought to myself, well, why don't I just become the leader that I'm waiting for? Like, why don't I just build this thing that very clearly everybody is asking for? And it was right after that, in January of 2021, that I launched the Lead Syndicate, for, the first version, V1 of Lever. That was right after that I actually launched the company.
I have goosebumps hearing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's inspiring. I think it's one of the things you touched on that's really interesting, though, is starting the business sort of like in the midst of a pandemic. I think like there's a big history of, we like to say here at OJO Movoto, dangerous opportunity, right? Of like in times of crisis is when these like, great opportunities present themselves. And that's sort of what you did here. It's when OJO acquired Movoto, it was during the pandemic. How did that sort of like affect your ability to get the business off the ground, and sort of talk about maybe doing something that seems counter to what everyone else would normally do during a pandemic, which is like, well, I've got a safe job and I should stay where I am?
Well, what's really interesting is that the pandemic, I'll talk about the ways it worked for me and the ways it definitely worked against me. Because what's interesting, I agree with that. And part of the reason that this acquisition and partnership even happened is because I love that there's so many people at Movoto and OJO who think that way and who see the world that way. And it's where we connected initially. And what was interesting about starting it during that time is that had I started Lever maybe a couple years earlier, I don't know that it would have been possible because we are so virtual, right? Because we support agents in hundreds of locations across the country. And I don't know that the world was ready for such a virtual environment just yet, right? But COVID, like, propelled us into that, right? The only way that what I do is possible is through this virtual environment, which we live now because of COVID, right? That everybody's very comfortable in now. So I don't think that part would have been possible. Alternatively, it was probably the worst time from a real estate perspective to launch what I did because the market was so good. And a lot of people look at me sideways and they're like, wait, wouldn't you want the market to be good? The hard part is in what I do, no, because a really easy real estate market, a really good, quote unquote, real estate market makes for really lazy bad agents. I said it. Like, I said what I said. Success is a terrible teacher. And so we would go and we would show agents what we did, and they would say, yeah, this makes a whole lot of sense. This is like exactly what I would need. But Nikki, I got a real estate license and a pulse, and I walk outside and money is free, and somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, I want to buy a multi-million-dollar home. And I just say, okay, right? Like, agents were having their best years ever in 2021 and 2022. And business was easier than it had ever been, and probably will ever be again. And so getting Lever off the ground at first, or the Lead Syndicate at the time off the ground at first, was hard because agents were like, we don't need help. We're fine. We're doing great. That said, that all changed towards the end of 2022. And that's when what we do like really took off.
I think like forever boom times lead to the death of innovation. Like, you don't have to disrupt anything when there's nothing that needs to be disrupted. It's very interesting.
For sure. Well, and it made us look really smart, but we're not that smart. And I'm not that smart. I just pay attention, right? Like that's I think as a journalist, you're taught to pay attention to everything because you have to, right? You gotta write that content, right? So you have to pay attention to everything. And I always say one of my great skills in business and in life is that I just pay attention. And I get asked all the time, like, how do you teach like this, or how do you coach like this in real estate? I'm like, I pay attention. You'd have to be a fool to talk to and support as many agents as I do and not see trends. Like, you'd have to actually try to not see the rhythm and the trends in how business behaves. And if you watch the trends in real estate, you're right, Patrick, for every boom time, there is a time on the other side of that where life and business and the economy is going to get a little bit more challenging. And so I remember we have a lot of agents now who we originally met and talked to back in like 2021 and 2022. And I remember having the conversation. I'm a pretty direct communicator. So they would come to me and they would say like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. Business is great. And I would say, right now, it's all good. Like, sun's shining and you're fine. But what's going to happen when the market changes? These problems aren't going away, by the way, right? The fact that you are not doing these things in your business is not going away. And you are going to have to pay for the consequence and the compound interest of you not solving these problems at some point. I realize that day is not today, but that day will come, I promise you. And so many of those people came back to us later and were like, yep, you were right. And business is really hard right now. And we're suffering because we didn't solve all these problems. and then we had the opportunity to help them then, but I wish we had had the opportunity to prevent them from going through that pain.
Our audience is people who are interested in getting their foot in the door in the real estate industry. You are someone who pays attention and you support tons of agents. Can we go over maybe some red flags and green flags of real estate agents?
For sure. Let's start with some green flags. Let's start with the positive first. The green flags, to me, when somebody wants to get into real estate, the first question I ask them is, why do you want to do this job, and why now, right? Because I think that we get a lot of people who are like, I just really love looking at houses. I'm like, well, that's awesome, and that's not what we do, right? Or you get the people who are like, I saw $1 million listing and I want to be just like them. I'm like, awesome, that's all fake. Right. So when somebody gets into real estate, I really want to understand what their goal is and why they're getting into this business. And by the way, I think a lot of people are afraid to say one of my favorite answers, which is somebody comes to me and says, something to the effect of like, hey, I want financial freedom, and I don't want to be capped in my income, and I want to have the opportunity to grow as much as I am willing to create. And I would be like, yeah, this is a great industry for you. You can absolutely do that here. There's no ceiling. Alternatively, there's also no floor, right? And so it can be really challenging. It can also be really, really rewarding. And so I always start with like, why this and why now? Secondarily, what I always am looking for is someone who, no matter what industry they come from and no matter what background they come from, somebody who is so willing to learn. And what I always say, I always want to be in an environment where I'm the biggest loser in the room. Right? I just want to be the biggest loser in the room all the time. I want to be surrounded by people who are much smarter than me, much more accomplished than me. And I am in the habit always of learning from whomever I'm in the room with. I want to ask a lot of questions. I want to learn what you know. And even now, having been in the industry as long as I've been in, whenever I'm around other really successful people, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not there to compare our resumes. What I'm there to learn is whatever you know that I don't know. I'm going to ask you 1,000,000 questions. Even if you've been in the industry for a year, if there's something that I think you're doing right, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about it because it's an opportunity for me to learn from you, right? So I think a lot of people struggle when they get into real estate with it, that they don't want to be found out, or they don't want to show their inexperience. And that, I think, can be just such a detriment to your growth and to your opportunity. So I would say the two biggest things I look for are like, why do you want to get into this in the first place? And also, are you someone who can be humble enough to be a beginner and to be an amateur in this? And if you can do both of those things and you can make peace with the fact that this industry is challenging and takes a lot of hard work, then you're going to kill it. That's I think the recipe for success. Red flags. I always just say like it's probably you just flip the coin.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but I would say the biggest red flags are people who feel a need to, and this might be like my biggest red flag in life in general, but the people who feel the need to tell me all the things that they've done, right? Or all the things that they know. It's usually just a big red flag that they know very little of what they're actually trying to talk about. And I always say the example of, part of my job when I was a CEO was to interview a lot of agents, and particularly would interview new agents sometimes too. And they would feel the need to like, let me know all the ways that they know about real estate. And almost always that person was going to be a challenge for our team if we even brought them in the first place, because they were so focused on sharing what they knew that they weren't willing to learn what they didn't know in order to be successful. And I think also, like I said, the people who don't make peace with the fact that this business is just a challenge. Like, this business is very hard and it requires a lot of hard work. And I always say you have to. There are days that are incredible and so rewarding, and what we do is just so cool. And there's also some days where you're going to get punched in the teeth. And like, if you can't take both of those types of days, it's probably not the industry for you.
Right. I think that's some phenomenal advice for aspiring real estate agents, seriously, and really just in general.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: business is business, and life is life, right? Like, there's not a whole lot that exists in one, like one particular silo and environment.
I think something that I've always found really unique about the real estate industry is that, like, theoretically, it's very competitive, right? You're all competing with each other for listings. You're competing with each other for consumers, but it also gives back a lot. It's an industry that's like sort of big on cooperation and sharing and coaching and helping people become better. Can you provide a little bit of insight into why you think that is?
I mean, I think because it's hard, right? Like, I think anyone who's done the hard work of building a real estate business, like one that's actually functioning and profitable and does well, I think knows how hard it is and is very willing to pour into and share information with the person who's willing to receive it and act on it. Right? Like I always laugh because I tell this all the time, but it's so true. Every time I do an industry event, Chris Heller and I, our president, were just at an industry event together, and this happened to us together. And somebody will stop us in the hallway, and they'll be like, "Okay, it's just you and me. Nobody else is around, and I promise I won't tell anybody the answer to this question." And we're like, "Yeah, what's up?" And they're like, "What's the secret to real estate? Like, what's the secret that you're not telling anybody? Just tell us. We promise that we won't tell anyone." And every single time I'm like, "All right, you promise? You promise you won't tell anybody?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I promise. Just give it to me." I'm like, "Have you considered like just doing the work? Because that's it." That said, there are some tools, tricks, and trades in order to do the work at a higher level, to convert at a higher level, to expand at a larger level, to build better systems, all of that. But I think anyone who has built a real estate business understands that it's just really hard work. And we all had somebody turn around and reach out their hand and help us, right, in order to get to where we want to go. And every single one of us, I think, remembers that. And I've had many incredible mentors and leaders over the years that have helped me and poured into me and coached me and given me best practices in order to get to where I wanted to go faster. And I think that you have an obligation to give that back. I think when you've been helped in business and life, and you know that you are where you are because so many other people turned around and reached out their hand to help you, you have an absolute obligation to give that back. And I think we just see a lot of that in the real estate industry.
Right. So to wrap this episode up, let's do one last question before we go into our little rapid fire section. Can you tell us about the first house you've ever sold?
Oh, this is a good one. Okay. This is a really good one. The first house I ever sold, I got because, like I said, I built my whole business door knocking. And the first house I ever sold, I got from door knocking a neighborhood. And one of the days that I door knocked this neighborhood, there was a lady who screamed at me. I kid you guys not. It was a scare. I still, like, my body has still a physical reaction when I think about this, when I tell this story. She screamed at me that I was like trespassing and that I was a terrible person and to get off her lawn, and like the literal worst nightmare that anyone could have about door knocking. She also called the police on me. No joke. Like, they actually showed up and I had to like talk to them. It was awful and so terrifying. And I stopped doing it for a couple weeks because of that incident. And I was like, I have to get back out there. Like, I have to do this. I have to, if for nothing else, to not be terrified of doing this forever. But it just so happened that that after months and months and months and months and months of door knocking in this neighborhood, one of the sellers agreed to work with me, or one of the homeowners agreed to work with me to sell their home. And it happened to be her next door neighbor. And so the first home I ever sold was right next door to this lady. And you guys, I was petrified. Like, the home itself was a very normal sale, went really well. We killed it. Like, it was a great first sale for me. People were awesome, so sweet. We still talk to this day, and great, like, easiest first sale an agent could have. But it was always like clouded and shrouded by this lady that lived next door, to the point, you guys, I'm like such a coward. I hate saying this out loud, but I wouldn't even do my own open house because I was so afraid that she would come in. And so I told the agent that did the open house for me, I was like, hey, if this lady comes in, like, watch out, just heads up. And the sellers had asked for us to include everybody on a sign-in sheet. Like, they wanted to know who came by. So we did, of course. And she came in and she entered in her phone number and her email. And the agent that did the open house told me, like, hey, FYI, the lady came in. Have her information in case she ever calls you, right? And so I put her in my database because that's what we were taught to do. We like put everybody in our database. But I literally put a big X on her in the database and never actually called her. And years later, I remember going through and I was calling everybody in my database, and I had skipped over this lady so many times that I was like terrified of calling her. And I finally one day was like, okay, I can't look people in the eye as a leader and say, make the calls even when you're scared, or door knock even when you're scared, and not do it myself. Like, I'm just completely being inauthentic. I'm such a fraud. I got to call this lady. So I finally call her. Her name's Mary. And I call her and I said, Mary, this is Nikki Miller. I don't know if you remember me, but this is how we met. And this is how I got your information. I said, do you still hate me? And she just started laughing on the phone. And after like a minute of her cackling away, she said, I'm so sorry I did that. You happened to catch me a week after my husband had died. And we ended up having a great conversation, building a great relationship. I sold her house, and it just so happened she was like the mayor of that town. And Mary is part of the reason that I became as successful as quickly as I did. I sold her house, and I can source at least 12 or 13 sales from Mary, directly from Mary, in like the span of a year and a half or so. Her family, her whole family, and a bunch of other people in the neighborhood. And so she wasn't my first sale, but I remember it was so meaningful because of Mary, who lived next door, who again, I'm still in contact with today. And she always is my testament to just like do things when you're scared, number one. And number two, be curious. You just never know what somebody is going through. You never know why someone is behaving the way that they do. And it's almost never about you. Almost never about you. Like that day was nothing about me and had everything to do with the stress that Mary was experiencing in her life. And so Mary's sort of my totem, so to speak, of remembering to always be patient with people, to be kind, to be curious, and to know that first impressions don't have to be the entire story, or don't have to be every chapter in the story, rather, I should say.
Wow, what a way to end. Shout out, Mary.
Shout out, Mary.
All right, so we play this little game at the end of our episodes called Let's Get Real. We're going to ask you 3 rapid fire questions. Answer, try not to think too much about them. You ready?
Got it.
All right, number 1, you can give one piece of advice and only one piece of advice to an aspiring agent. What is it?
Just do the work. Like, you have to call people. If you want to sell more real estate, you have to talk to more people about selling real estate. Like, that's your job. That's it. Don't make it more complicated than that.
What do you think is one book that every real estate agent should read?
Easy. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Absolute my favorite negotiation communication book out there.
And then you have one last day in Southern California. What are you doing?
I think I'm going to the beach with my daughter and my husband and my dog. And we're just like running through the waves and water.
Sounds like a wonderful day. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nikki, for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.